live. Welcome, everyone, and everyone in the future who will be tuning in. You're watching Hard Targets, open source intel by the people for the people, news from a multipolar world. This is Teray. We got some breaking news from the past couple of hours that information is now just coming in because, as you can tell from the title, we just found out here in the United States that the IDF has ordered an airstrike against Syria, it's northern Syria, specifically the city of Aleppo. So information is now just coming out here because it happened in the middle of the night over there because of the time difference. So we're now just getting reports out now. But before we get into the details and try to figure out what in the hell is going on over there, all the usual calls to action. Follow me on Telegram. I got my first Telegram follower today, so after a month of doing this, shout out to my first Telegram follower. Why don't you be the second? Hop in the link in the description. Follow me on Telegram because you never know when I'm going to be taking off of Twitter. But you can also follow me on my Twitter account as well, which I'll be dropping the link in the chat. Here we are. Yeah. Make sure to follow me there to get accounts of events like this happening, every single day, and a perspective that doesn't come from the mainstream media, that does not come from the typical neoconservative and neoliberal matrix of U.S. hegemony, of military expansion and empire, of the Zionist empire that is the United States, and the Zionist-occupied government that is the United States political system. It takes all sorts of people to be able to combat this narrative and to pose a counter-narrative to the constant stream of propaganda, and not just propaganda, but also part of the strategy of this U.S. empire and its media is to inflict despair onto the population. That is just as much a weapon of war as the missiles that are dropping from Israeli planes, is to instill despair in the population to be able to resist these actions. So resist the narrative that there is nothing we can do to fight back against the forces of Zionism and the American empire. And be sure to join in on the conversation. Get people into the live. So, what we know so far about the airstrike in Aleppo, the facility that has been targeted is the International Airport, and the exact justification is still, as far as I can tell, being disputed. Of course, there's going to be multiple sources telling of what the exact airstrike is, but I'm not sure we're going to get official statements from either the Syrian government, from Assad's side, or from the Israeli side until the next few hours when it's morning over there in the Middle East. But currently, as it stands, the Aleppo International Airport was the facility that was the target of an IDF airstrike. We do know that the IDF struck the Aleppo Airport, and that the Aleppo Airport has been taken out of commission. It is offline. So I have no idea as of right now the extent of the damage, but it was significant enough. The bombing was significant enough that there's just no function going on in the facility. There were some reports of multiple explosions, allegedly. The quote-unquote real target was an arms shipment. This is speculation, uh, and we can go to Twitter right now to see some of the information coming out uh, about the strike. And you have your typical Zionist chills trying to blame the Iranian government for this attack. One of the reports I'd seen was that like the real target was an arms shipment from the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, which the United States has deemed a terrorist organization, because any military organization that resists American occupation is going to be deemed a terrorist threat, or that resists Israeli terrorism, like actual Israeli military terrorism, destabilizing the region. And like that, they've designated Hezbollah a terrorist organization. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps a terrorist organization. They've labeled the Assad presidency and the Assad regime a terrorist organization, all of whom share in common the resistance to uh, Zionist terrorism from Israel and from the American government, American occupation in Syria, American uh, deep state attacks and attempts at regime change in Iran, as well as in Lebanon. I'm not sure anyone remembers the massive explosion that took place in Lebanon back in 2020, after the government there had pushed back against Israeli military aggression, and then magically a few weeks later there was the largest explosion that had happened in Lebanon, or even in the region in decades. So any reports coming out of whatever the Israelis were targeting doesn't really matter, um, because they target innocent civilians, they target children, they target uh, journalists, they commit crimes against humanity every single day. So there is no reason to believe that this time they have targeted an infrastructure or human lives, or any sort of target for bombing that posed any sort of threat. Uh, But yeah, let me share my screen here to show the. Oh, right. I don't think I can show my screen because I'm not on StreamYard today. Well, something I can do. I don't think so. Not here from just YouTube. I need to be on StreamYard. I mean, you can go to Twitter and you can just type Aleppo into the search bar, and you're going to see, like, it's the top results coming out is going to be against the bombing. Um, yeah, we have people like Aaron Mate of the Gray Zone uh, making sure to speak out against it. Um, yeah, so that's what we know so far. This comes in the wake of the 7.8 earthquake. I done a video on that a couple of weeks ago, where at the time when I had made the video and the earthquake had just happened a couple hours prior, I had said in that video that the death toll in Turkey and Syria, I think I said at the time a couple hours afterward, that it had been 6,000 deaths. But over the course of several days, as happens with natural disasters, when infrastructure starts to crumble, and the ripple effects of that kind of destruction really starts to take its toll, the total death toll over that catastrophic earthquake was well above 30,000 people in Turkey alone. Not to mention Aleppo, which was the city that had been one of the hardest affected by the earthquake. Tens of thousands of people dead, many more displaced without housing, and in the middle of a country that is facing severe economic sanctions from the United States. So where Turkey could get, at the very least, international aid and financial assistance, could get medical equipment to rescue the dying and unbury the dead from the rubble. Syria got barely a fraction of this international assistance because of sanctions placed on the country by the United States, which should remind us all that sanctions are an act of war, that the country faces that sort of restriction, that sort of starvation, of economic starvation, for simply for opposing Zionist aggression in the region. So the country that has been fighting a civil war for a decade, has been, a third of which is still occupied by the United States military, that is overrun with Daesh, with ISIS, still has had now been affected by a 7.8 earthquake, killing thousands and thousands of people, on top of which having no means of organized international support to recover from this, uh, yet another disaster. The aid that was coming in primarily through the Aleppo International Airport, meaning that the IDF is, for whatever reason they give, is targeting Syria to keep it in a state of permanent disaster, that it can't even recover from this earthquake that happened a couple of weeks ago. People are still being dug out of the rubble. Corpses are still being dug out of the rubble. This is how recent this earthquake is. And the IDF has bombed the sole means of any aid coming into the country from coming into the country. There should be no doubt in anyone's mind what the goals are of the IDF, of Zionist occupation of the Middle East. It's to terrorize the region. It is to turn Palestine into the United States' personal military base of terrorism against anyone who opposes the United States and their colonial foreign policy goals in the region, including regime change in Iran, in Syria, in the devastation of Iraq. This, and I had been reading a New York Times article. I have it pulled up here, and on Tor. So a reminder, if you ever want to bypass the New York Times paywall, you can read every article that they publish on there on the Onion router, on the dark web. And for those of you who don't know, Israel has, for the past couple of weeks, had massive protests. I mean, several countries, especially in Europe, have had massive protests for the past few weeks. But Israel is among them, specifically for Netanyahu's proposal, his government plan to take away powers of their Supreme Court. And this had prompted weeks of demonstrations, thousands of people taking to the streets to demonstrate, tens of thousands of people who fear that the democracy of their country is under threat, and we need to take to the streets to protest the rise of far right consolidation of power. They're taking away our democracy. And the article that I pulled up, the title is, since I can't share it, the title is "Protests Over Netanyahu's Judiciary Overhaul Spread to Israel's Military." Well, these protests are now affecting, creating a schism within the Israeli military. And yet, despite the reservations of the IDF Air Force pilots, a coalition of 50 officers in the Air Force who represent some of the rank and file in the Reserve Corps, despite their heavy misgivings, despite their their fears of the democracy being taken away, and according to them, that they could be targeted for. Yeah, they also quote. They also fear that they may be asked to engage in illegal operations. Still find the time to exact a missile strike against Syria, as they've done hundreds of times before, as they've done dozens of times before in Gaza. This should point out to everyone here in the United States that when we send 3.8 billions of dollars of aid every single year to Israel, it doesn't matter how liberal the regime says it is. It doesn't matter how many people protest uh, against the human rights violations of the Israeli government. It does not matter how many people protest those things. Israel de facto is a terrorist regime. Zionism de facto is a genocidal project. It's funny. I mean, it's not funny, but I mean, it's a shocking coincidence that a comrade of mine had reached out to me on Telegram to share with me some inspiration from a quote from Malik Al Shabazz Malcolm X. For those of you who aren't familiar, um, that this person had sent me a quote as I was preparing to go live, and and this Malcolm X quote is relevant to all of this media circus that's going on in Israel, where Minister Malcolm says, even in these demonstrations that brought about token integration, the only reason he gave up some tokens was because the world was watching him. He didn't do it because your protest changed him. This is what you've got to understand. Why you can protest against this man all day long. It's no change of heart that makes him back up. He looks across the water and sees the world looking at him, and he changes only to the degree that you have reached world opinion. And he's talking about liberal. I forget which liberal politician, but he's talking about the people in the liberal regimes that they're protesting. And he changes only to the degree that you have reached world opinion. If you have changed world opinion, he changes, but you don't change his opinion. No. And if you don't understand that, then you need to crawl back in the cotton patch, because that's where you belong. You don't belong out here on the world stage. And that is it's wild to me that this comrade had shared that quote with me for some daily inspiration, daily revolutionary inspiration, because it applies so heavily here to the case of Israel, that even in the middle of massive protests, some of the largest that Israel has ever seen, so large that the military itself is divided on the policies, on the policy splits forming in the government. Even amidst this turmoil, the military still finds the capability to drop missiles onto colonized countries like Syria. This should make it abundantly clear that it does not matter if the entire population of Israel protested against this regime. It's not going to change their opinions. It's not going to change their policy goals. It will merely force them to mask their policy goals. Zionism has always been a project of extinction. The Minister of Information, this is a quote recently from the Minister of Information, not about the Aleppo bombing, but about the split in the military. That the Air Force Reserve Corps aren't real officers. They aren't real Zionists. They aren't wonderful men. As if Zionist murderers could be called wonderful men. But That's the standard. That's always going to be the standard. That's always going to be the function. That's always going to be the ontological reality. That's always going to be the opinion, the mindset, whatever you want to call it, of Zionism. And it will not stop unless world opinion combats this regime. Unless America stops sending nearly $4 billion of aid to Israel. No conditions, no thing, like no compromise, no de-escalation, or what do you call it? Um, Slow, no one's like slow process of we'll take away a little bit at a time. No, complete severance of foreign aid to Israel. It is causing unprecedented amounts of misery in not just in Palestine, but in the entire Persian Gulf. Like since November, Iran has been battling chemical attacks from unknown sources, who I can only assume has to be the Mossad. There is no evidence of who was carrying out these chemical attacks. There was one suspect in one of the universities arrested, a young girl. I had retweeted it on my Twitter profile. So once again, follow me on Twitter if you want more details about these things that are going on. But yeah, a suspect was arrested a few days ago, Serena Mahmoud Salehi, who was a student at Karaj Girls Technical University, where some of these girls, because they're all students, all for the past few months, all women who have been targeted and poisoned. She was arrested in connection with these chemical attacks. I can only assume that, like the feminist LGBT foreign backed protests that had been happening in Iran in months prior, this is yet another foreign regime change operation carried out by the likes of the CIA and the Mossad. Even without evidence, it is a pretty safe bet to assume that those would be the actors involved, because of obvious acts of terrorism like what's happening in Syria, because of obvious military aggression, because of obvious stated goals of the IDF to carry out, that they're running out of time to enact regime change in Iran, because Iran is this close to achieving nuclear energy, having producing nuclear materials for producing their own nukes, that they will be able to defend their sovereignty as a nation, as a sovereign country, with borders that cannot be illegally invaded, whose airspace cannot be illegally violated, whose citizens cannot be illegally attacked by Nazi regimes like the Israeli government, a type of sovereignty that can be enforced with nuclear armament. When that happens, the IDF recognizes that they will have no means of starting a conflict with Iran. So they have stated that they are trying to escalate conflict with Iran. And on certain Telegram channels, they were pointing out that, they say here, U.S. fears that Israel will launch surprise assault in Iran. Senior Israeli defense official tells Ynet Alerts. Urgent visits by U.S. military chief and secretary of defense meant to coordinate and approve any Israel moves. So this is the irony of how many protests are going on in Israel. It's not, they're disappointed and they're afraid, not that the Israeli government is going to do anything illegal on their behalf, but they will not have approved of this illegal occupation, this illegal genocide of the people in the Middle East. That is their concern. Because the rank and file of the IDF have no qualms over Netanyahu's uh, government plan. They know what type of organization they are joining. They are happy to join such an organization. The rank and file are happy to join such an organization as the IDF, as the Israeli Defense Force, to murder Palestinians, to drop missiles onto Syria, to invade countries like Iran and Lebanon to destabilize their societies and train people to do terror attacks. They're happy to do this. It's just like high-ranking officials in the reserve corps who are afraid of losing their cushy positions and are trying to put on a public face of compassion and concern about human rights, when really they just want to be able to commit human atrocities and not be tried for these crimes in an international court. They want the express approval of the United States, so that they can guarantee that they will not be tried. These are cowards who just want the guarantee that they will not be tried in an international court for these crimes against humanity. These are animals. These are Nazi level criminals, whatever you want to call them. Yeah, so I think it's important to be able to say that no amount of protesting is going to fix that, because we can already see the effects of this going on here in the United States. This is the last thing I want to talk about. People who want to protest, who want to go to the streets and protest and make their voices heard on the streets. This is the same thing that's going and orchestrated by the same people that's going on in Atlanta over Cop City. This is another thing that is picking up national attention again, is that this Antifa Week of Action is going on in Atlanta at Cop City, the 85 acres of woodlands that has been earmarked for development as a training facility for Atlanta police officers in militarized urban warfare, that will be used as a training facility to export this type of militarized police to precincts all over the country, and will act in cooperation with the IDF. Go figure! Go fucking figure that the urban military Nazi force in Israel is being used as an educational tool for Democrat-controlled cities to turn their police forces into Democrat-loyal military occupations, as they're doing in Atlanta, to systematize that sort of policing, so that there will be no effective resistance against the kinds of police shootings that happen every single day, or any sort of protests against Democrat regimes into the future. There will be no hope of protesting at all, because there will be this military alignment between the local police forces and the U.S. military. Protesting on the part of Antifa to pretend like it's going to have any sort of effect does nothing. And in fact, is part of that same illusion that liberals want to play on your mind. That the same networks, the same open society networks that George Soros and his ilk push overseas. That's what Antifa is doing here in Atlanta, to where neocons and these Zionists want to convert American police into local militaries. Liberals just want no police. Liberals just want a Mad Max anarchist environment run by autonomous autonomous collectives, by compassionate autonomous collectives and networks of feminist anarchy circles where no one's in charge, no one has authority, where we're all equal. Oh, and the crime rate is going up because there is no force that can combat crime, that can combat uh, violence, individuals. That's what Antifa is setting up and building that network, growing it every single day with organizations that have. I mean, I closed the tabs on my laptop here, but there's these growing number of collectives like media collectives and legal funds that are being grown and expanded to get people charged with domestic terrorism during these protests. That 23 people who got charged today with domestic terrorism for trespassing on construction sites and throwing Molotov cocktails at construction equipment and making violent threats against the police. Like those are the kinds of people that are being bailed out. Starting these autonomous bail funds where no one is accountable, where no one is in charge, and therefore rank and file goons can get away with an increasing level of this kind of violence. You have, and then you have the mayor of Atlanta himself, Andre Dickens, who is this month assigning a 40-person task force to get community involvement, to get the concerns and the suggestions of the communities, to hear what they want to do with some of the land or surrounding Cop City, and to turn it into recreational spaces, green spaces, parks, monuments, stuff that is in no way useful to raising the living standards of the local Black community, the working class Black community in the region. Just this green space, big, in that fashion of turning community governance into this faceless network of bureaucrats who do nothing but still pocket your tax dollars. And when things go wrong, like crime goes up, when terrorists are flying in from states from all over the country to throw Molotov cocktails, no one is accountable to solving the problem. No one has any ability to have a firm executive decision to sweep aside Antifa, to sweep aside crime, to build up manufacturing in the region, make any sort of decision, anything. Just replacing industry and community defense with nothing, with bureaucracy, with a parasitic top layer of governance that takes away all decision making from you, while your life gets steadily worse and more dangerous. That tells you that it's fine because we're having more equitable hiring practices for our board members, for our committees that are making decisions about your life. There are more Black women making decisions about how you get poorer than there ever have been. So you should be happy. That's what these protests are about, to instill, to build that kind of governance. That's what these protests are building in real time through these networks, these open society networks. That's the same kind of society that the liberals, that the left wing Zionists in Israel want. These two things are intimately related. These are two strategies of globalism that are currently becoming more violent with each other, that they no longer have peaceful means of transferring power between the two. There are increasing levels of antagonism between this right wing, explicitly fascistic, explicitly violent, militaristic occupation, this neoconservative will to power, this absolute authority, and this left wing globalism, this left wing Zionism of uh, of a coalition of Zionists, of making sure everyone is on board with the Zionism. Multilateralism is what some people would call it. That was the multilateralism of the Obama era, where it's okay that we invaded Syria and that the American military is occupying Syria to this day. We just don't want to surprise anybody with a Syrian occupation. We want to make sure everyone feels heard and represented in this violent occupation of a sovereign nation. That is not any sort of choice. That is not any sort of real dichotomy that we can choose from. Both are the two wings of the same Zionist globalist machine. The only way forward is taking the helm of power away from these people to stop financing Israel, where this uh, cycle of militarization is coming from, and blowing back into the United States to end this cycle of terrorism going on in the Persian Gulf. Stop sending them $4 billion a year to find the Zionists in the American government and to confront them about about these policies, about what they are doing to stop Israeli aggression against Iran and by proxy other countries in the region like Syria, and that they're doing nothing to demand that they get the hell out of office, replace them with people who will actually put the who actually enforce the will of the people to end these wars of Zionist genocide, to increase real economic forces, to bring back jobs, not to continue to force other countries into this ISIS style permanent war against terrorist organizations. Same like what the Atlanta police is doing with against Antifa, to actually bring real economic prospects back into like local economies so that crime doesn't go up, so that young men aren't feeling like they have to be recruited into these gangs, into these international criminal organizations to be able to defend themselves or feed themselves. Give community members the means to actually get control over their own lives. Get like end the sanctions against Syria so that they can build up their country again, so they can develop and move past this apocalypse scenario they've been living in for a decade. That is what real power comes from, not from going out into the street and making your voice heard through protest. No, it is from grasping onto the means of developing your people like in a real material way and demanding that you get access to those forces of production. And if you can't, partner with people who will help you do that, like Syria is allegedly doing with Iran. I don't know if that's true, if it was a transfer of arms, but if they were getting guns from Iran, good. They are still occupied by Daesh, which is being trained by the American military, and who's also like ISIS. That's what like ISIS is like real name is Daesh, who is fighting for the Ukrainian government. So it's no wonder that Israel and the United States is plotting to uh, keep Syria in permanent occupation by Daesh, because Daesh is in a very real way an American organization. It has the full support of the American deep state. It's no surprise to me. So even if it is true that this was an arms transfer, I want Syria to have more armaments. I want them to have more guns. I want them to have the means to defend themselves. I want these sanctions to be lifted so that they can continue to you know, improve their quality of life after a decade of civil war and bombings and ISIS terrorism. These are good things. It doesn't matter what your individual opinions are on the Assad government. It does not matter. Because if you're against it, then you should still tell the American government to stop funding Israel and let them figuring out on their own the development of the Persian Gulf on its own terms is objectively a good thing for all parties involved, except the genocidal ones, the ones who want to exact death and destruction so that they can reap profits, because it is cheaper to reap profits from a world in decline than it is for for these people, for these finance capitalists to exact profits from actually investing in industry and infrastructure and human life. And I'm rambling at this point, but yeah, this is all this to say that for those of you who feel like you need to take to the streets to protest, there are much more. Yeah, I know what you're protesting for. There are much more effective goals to be achieving than just representation, or representation in the media, than just going and burning everything down, and just opposing the regime for the regime's sake. Like, who do you support? If you support any part of the status quo of of American hegemony, of American control by the military-industrial complex, then you are part of the problem. Then you are just one of these liberals in support of soft power, of continued occupation, and bipartisan support of and multilateral support of genocide. Like, unless your support is explicitly with uh, the people of like the people, the working people, the average citizen of Syria affected by these earthquakes and these bombings, unless you're pro them, not saying that that your idea of what their government should be, that you know what their government should be better than they do. That no, regardless of what your opinions are, it's to allow them to develop on their own terms. That should be your goal, and that means getting. And you should want that for your community as well. Um, if that's what you want for your community, then you should afford that same level of sovereignty overseas to a culture that is different than yours and whose values are different from yours. If you want to, and if you're one of these insane individuals who wants to live in the Atlanta woods and be living like a caveman for the rest of your life, you do you. But you should recognize that that is not a popular position to take, and most people actually want to improve their living conditions, to have more developments, that they actually don't want to be living in the woods like Ewoks. Your support should be with the majority of people and what the will of the people is. Because it is the masses of people who are ultimately going to be moving history, who are going to be the driving force of humanity, of keeping the country going. So that's yeah. So that's all I have to say on the matter so far, with all the details that we have so far. So if we find out more and the story develops, like, and I can always make another video about this. But again, thank you for tuning in for the past 45 minutes. For those of you who are watching in the future, and make sure to once again, you can follow me on Telegram and Twitter, so we can continue this conversation together. I'm always happy to have your input. For now, you've been watching Hard Targets. This is Touré Nasheed, and I will see you all in the next video. I'm out.